George Michael's story is not just about fame, music, or celebrity scandal. It's about what happens when one of the biggest stars on the planet spends years protecting a private life that the public believes it has a right to own. And when I looked through George Michael's career, one thing stood out to me more than any chart-topping hit: the constant battle between personal privacy and public curiosity. If you enjoy stories that go beyond headlines and uncover the deeper meaning behind celebrity lives, hit the like button so content like this keeps showing up every time I post. Imagine selling millions of records around the world, becoming one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment, and still feeling like parts of your real life must remain hidden. That tension followed George Michael for decades. While many people remember the music, my research shows that some of the most important chapters of his story happened away from the recording studio. George Michael first rose to global fame as one half of the band Wham, alongside Andrew Ridgeley. The duo became one of the defining pop acts of the 1980s, but even during those years of screaming fans, sold-out tours, and non-stop media attention, George Michael was already learning a lesson that would shape the rest of his life. Fame creates demand, and the public often wants more than your work. It wants access to you. That reality became even stronger when he launched his solo career. Albums like Faith transformed him from a successful pop star into a global superstar. The image was carefully constructed. The leather jackets, sunglasses, music videos, and confident public persona became part of the brand. But what I find interesting is that while audiences saw confidence, George Michael was privately dealing with questions about identity, privacy, and how much of himself he wanted the world to know. Many celebrities today openly share details of their relationships, family lives, and personal struggles on social media. George Michael came from a completely different era. During the 1980s and early 1990s, public expectations were different. Record labels often believed that mystery helped sell records. At the same time, discussions around sexuality were far less open than they are today. As a result, George Michael became known for protecting his private life. That decision was not unusual for major stars of the era. What makes his story significant is how much pressure eventually built around that privacy. The more successful he became, the more media organizations wanted answers about his personal relationships. I think this is where many people misunderstand his story. Some assume secrecy automatically means deception. But when I examine the culture of that period, I see someone trying to maintain control over deeply personal parts of his life while operating inside an industry that often rewarded exposure and punished difference. The turning point came in 1998 when George Michael was arrested in a public restroom in Beverly Hills. The incident immediately became international news. Overnight, one of the biggest stars in the world found himself at the center of tabloid coverage, focused almost entirely on his sexuality. What fascinates me is not simply the event itself, but the reaction that followed. Many celebrities would have disappeared from public view after an embarrassing scandal. George Michael took a different path. He publicly acknowledged that he was gay and began speaking more openly about his life. That response changed the conversation. Instead of allowing the media to define the narrative, he reclaimed part of it. He even used humor to address the situation, releasing the song and video for Outside, which openly referenced the controversy. To me, that was more than a publicity move. It was a statement that embarrassment loses power when you refuse to hide from it. Still, being open did not suddenly end public scrutiny. In many ways, it intensified it. Media coverage shifted from speculation to constant examination. Every relationship, every public appearance, and every personal challenge became material for headlines. One aspect of George Michael's life that often gets overshadowed is his capacity for long-term commitment. Despite the public image sometimes created by tabloids, many of the most meaningful relationships in his life lasted for years. Perhaps the most significant was his relationship with Anselmo Felipe, a Brazilian designer whom he met in the early 1990s. By many accounts, Felipe played an important role in helping George Michael become more comfortable with his identity. This relationship mattered because it represented a period when he felt increasingly able to accept himself. Then, tragedy struck. Felipe was diagnosed with AIDS-related illness and later died. The loss had a profound impact on George Michael. When I look at interviews from later years, it becomes clear that this was not simply the loss of a partner. It was the loss of someone who helped him feel understood during a period of enormous internal conflict. That grief influenced both his personal life and his music. Several songs reflected themes of loss, love, and mortality. What stands out to me is how often audiences consume emotional music without realizing the personal experiences behind it. Years later, George Michael entered another significant long-term relationship with Kenny Goss. Their partnership lasted more than a decade. In celebrity terms, especially within entertainment circles known for short-lived romances, that is a remarkably long time. Yet even these relationships often received media treatment that focused more on gossip than substance. Instead of examining commitment, companionship, or emotional support, many outlets prioritized sensational angles. That pattern says as much about media culture as it does about the celebrities being covered, and that brings me to a larger issue that George Michael's story reveals. The treatment of LGBTQ celebrities has changed dramatically over the past several decades, but progress did not happen automatically. During much of George Michael's career, many LGBTQ public figures faced a difficult calculation. Being open could threaten career opportunities, sponsorships, audience acceptance, or media treatment. Remaining private often created endless speculation. Either choice came with consequences. George Michael lived through that transition period. He experienced an industry that initially encouraged silence, then a media environment that demanded disclosure, and finally, a cultural shift toward greater acceptance. What I find remarkable is that younger audiences today may not fully appreciate how different the landscape once was. Public figures who openly identify as LGBTQ now exist across music, film, sports, and television. While challenges certainly remain, visibility is far more common. George Michael's experiences helped contribute to that change, not because he intended to become a political symbol, but because his life forced conversations that many institutions preferred to avoid. Another aspect of his story that deserves attention is his generosity. For years, stories emerged after his death revealing private charitable donations and acts of kindness that had never been publicized. He reportedly supported individuals facing financial hardship, contributed to charities, and helped people without seeking publicity. I think that detail matters because it contrasts sharply with the public image often presented by tabloids. The headlines focused on controversies because controversy generates attention. But behind those headlines was a person whose actions often reflected empathy and compassion. That difference highlights one of the biggest lessons in celebrity culture. The version of a person that appears in media coverage is rarely the complete version. Public narratives simplify complex human beings into easy categories: hero, villain, victim, scandal. Real people rarely fit neatly into any of those boxes. When George Michael died in 2016, tributes poured in from fans, musicians, and public figures around the world. Many remembered his voice. Others remembered his songwriting. But what struck me most was how many people spoke about his authenticity. For someone who spent years protecting his privacy, that may seem ironic. Yet authenticity does not always mean sharing everything. Sometimes it means refusing to let outside pressure determine who you are. The deeper lesson here is not really about George Michael alone. It is about the cost of living under constant observation and the importance of maintaining ownership over your own story. We live in a culture where people are encouraged to share everything, post everything, and explain everything. George Michael's life reminds us that privacy is not necessarily secrecy. Sometimes privacy is simply a boundary. His story also shows how quickly public opinion can shift. A person criticized in one era can later be recognized as someone who helped move society forward. That should make all of us more careful about rushing to judgment, especially when we only see fragments of someone's life. And maybe that is why George Michael's story continues to resonate years after his passing. It is not just a celebrity story. It is a human story about identity, love, loss, resilience, and the struggle to remain yourself when millions of people think they know who you are. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into the lives, controversies, and untold stories behind the world's biggest celebrities. And let me know in the comments, do you think celebrities owe the public access to their private lives, or should some parts of a person's story always remain their own?